Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video, and in today's video I will be taking a look at a very interesting knife that, well, I'd been on the fence about this knife for quite some time and never really went through with buying it. However, recently I finally changed that and picked one of these up. Now this is from a brand you've probably never heard of before, Katz Knives. Now Katz Knives was a Canadian company, and it is a Canadian company, founded in Canada by Keith Katz, who was a hunter and outdoors enthusiast from a very young age, and he had an appreciation for tools such as knives and the such. And, well, later on, he founded the company, and it's been doing well ever since. It's not the most popular brand in Canada. That I would probably say would be Groman, as it's the most recognizable for local knives. But Katz definitely does share in the fame a little bit. Now granted, these are not made in Canada. They are made in Japan, with some being made in Spain. But the majority of them are from Japan, and I've heard rumors that some of their knives, particularly the folding knives, are made by Moki. And after my one Moki review just a little under a year ago, I have thought very highly of that company. They make very good knives, and, well, if that was anything to go by, then this certainly would be a nice purchase, which it absolutely was. Now, this is a very basic little box, red with some gold writing. It just says Katz Knives, katzknives.com. Inside the box, there's no certificate, just the knife. And this particular model is called the Stockman Executive. And it elevates the humble stockman pattern, a traditional trade tool of farmers and cattle herders, and elevates it into the realm of a gentleman's knife, and an urban, everyday carry. Now, this knife, which very much impressed me by its fit and finish, and when I say impressed, this knife could compete with Great Eastern Cutlery. I know, that's a very bold claim. Can I back it up? Well, I guess you'll just have to see in that regard, but from what I can say, this is very comparable to a Great Eastern Cutlery knife at about 2/3 of the price, and that's a new GEC. A used aftermarket scalper valued GEC, well, this would probably be about 1/3 of the cost. Now, this model is a particularly special one, as it features the Ashwood handles, which have a very nice grain pattern, very rich in color, very, very smooth also. I could have had Stag, but personally, for spending $10 extra and getting a kind of mediocre bark pattern, I would have much preferred getting the Ashwood. I believe they make these in Cherrywood, which was not available, and Jigged Bone, which is a very pretty kind of ambery brown color. Very nice jigging pattern. Again, definitely comparable to a GEC or perhaps even a case. But this is the wood model, and I very much enjoy the color scheme. Blends very nicely with the nickel silver and the brass. And, well, as I said earlier, this is a Stockman. I don't have many Stockmans, as I've never been a huge fan of the pattern, but this is my first, and, well, up until not that long ago, my only real Stockman. This one was made by Buck, and it's a bit of a hybrid at that, as the blade formulation is not like most. It definitely has the look of a Stockman, but the way the blades are aligned is not normal, as in most Stockmans, the sheep foot would be here, and the spay blade would be there. Also, there would not be a third central spring, which is another peculiar thing that I don't believe other Stockmans have. But this is still an okay knife. Again, made in China, it was fairly inexpensive, but this was my first real exposure to the Stockman. And as much as I enjoyed it, it still wasn't my favorite pattern. Then I upgraded a little and went with a single blade version of the Stockman, made by Booker of Zollingen, and this is absolutely spectacular, albeit very oily. This is a limited edition model made of the floorboards of the Castle Schlossberg, and It's a very, very rich oak, feels nice in the hand, and is considerably larger than the buck, also featuring a single 01 carbon steel blade with this beautiful acid wash. Again, size-wise, this is considerably larger, albeit a little bit thinner. This knife kind of fits in between the two. It's bigger than the buck, but smaller than the boker, and thickness is close to the boker, but I still believe this is a little bit... Is it thinner? No, it's a little bit thicker than the buck, but only by a tiny little bit. So, what's the quality like on this? And what is a Stockman? Well, for those who don't know, a Stockman pattern is a knife that, as you'd expect with many traditional pocket knives, was originally a Sheffield model, I believe, and it became very popular in the United States in the early 1800s, which is, I believe, around the time where it began to take off and become a staple carry as opposed to just an obscure pattern. And it was very popular with soldiers on both sides in the American Civil War, who often featured and favorited this knife, as it was very utilitarian, and having 3 blades made it easier to use and carry without having to sharpen as frequently. So when one of your blades began to dull, instead of having to sharpen it, you just resort to using another blade. And while that isn't probably the most efficient means of using a knife, it definitely worked in war times. The knife probably had its most popularity among, its greatest, I should say, among farmers and cattle herders, hence the name the Stockman. This also was helped along with the spay blade, which is a pretty uncommon blade shape, and you can imagine what this was used for. I don't think I need to say. But this is a blade shape I'm not a huge fan of, as it's a little awkward to sharpen when I do actually sharpen my knives, which isn't common because I don't often need to. But it's definitely sharp, but it is a peculiar shape nonetheless. Now, that's the brief history on the Stockman. Again, if you want a more in-depth discussion, I would suggest you go and watch Stefan Schmalhaus's video on this knife, which I believe is the only video of this on YouTube, aside from the one I'm doing now. And it was 9 years ago that he released that video, so I don't understand, but these don't seem to be very popular, which is unfortunate because they really are an underrated gem. Now, fit and finish. Well, we'll start with the back. You got polished stainless steel springs, which are very reflective, as you can see, with brass liners, no gapping, I should specify. The smoothness is absolutely spectacular here. There are no bumps, there are no curves, no sharp edges. This is very well sanded and rounded off. And you can see, again, the polishing is excellent. And this is an old stock knife, so there are some slight scratches here and there, but it's far from noticeable. Bolsters are nickel silver, and they are cut and pinched, which gives a very nice flare to them. So transitions from bolster to cover are seamless. The pins, which I believe are brass, although very highly polished, are fairly good, and this is really the only gripe I have. The wood is so incredibly smooth, but you can ever so slightly feel the pins. It's not severe, and you couldn't catch your fingernail on one of these, but it's enough that you will notice. And again, these are extremely small nitpicks, but when I claim something is Great Eastern Cutlery quality, I have to nitpick, because any flaws, no matter how small they might be, could be counted against the knife when you give it that label. And while this would personally not bother me, I would like to say it, because there will be some who find raised pins, even if it's just by a hair, to be the greatest nuisance in the world. And for that reason, I will mention it. The handles, again, are very smooth, very well sanded. This is an extremely comfy knife to hold. Quite ergonomic, despite the 3 blades. Again, beautiful polish here. I don't know if there's any resin in this wood because it feels like there could be, as these are just the smoothest handles I've seen in a long time. It's uncanny, but this could be resin wood, as there is no reason for a natural hardwood to be this smooth. Let's see the first blade. The nail nick is very well done. Oh, before we do that, one thing with Stockmans, and this is a consistent issue even with premium Stockmans, the blade centering is often iffy. And the other thing is, because there are 3 blades in a very confined space, it's almost a guarantee, and most people have just accepted that any Stockman knife will have blade rub, as when you're trying to open one blade, you'll scrape it against another. Now, I don't mean to be the one who shatters your perception of how these knives are made, but that isn't always the case. It's the thing you'd expect to see with a cheap Stockman. Heck, even something like a case could have blade rub, and it's quite common. But this model has somehow almost completely eliminated that, as the third integral liner you can see here, again made of brass, separates the 2 springs and also helps to, well, make the knife a little bit thicker. And because it's thicker, you can see that there's enough space for all the blades to fit comfortably without impacting each other, which is a very, very special thing and not something you really see with Stockmans. Again, even with the extra liner, I've seen Stockmans that have still looked very cramped, and every time you open them you hear the scrape of another blade being scratched. But with this one, well, bring it up really close and you can hear it. No scrape whatsoever, and you can see there's a very good space where the blade was, so yeah, there is no cramped fit in here. These are very, very precision done. There's no blade rub going on in this model. Now, another special thing about this particular version, I should also specify they do single blade Stockmans, and I suppose it would be somewhat comparable to this, although a different style, that is. You could get a single blade Stockman if you so wish, but this model is a little bit different, as this is their drop point. Now, I probably would have chosen the clip point had it been available, but this was the only one that was in the Ashwood. And as much as I'm not a huge fan of drop points, I think this looks quite exemplary. Very simple satin finish, but very well done. It's a bit oily, but again, no scratching here. Nice sharpening choil. The Katz logo right there. Blade play in any direction, non-existent. The blade, I believe, comes in at around 2 3/4, 2 2/3. I'll check. Overall length is 6 1/4 inches. Blade length is coming in just after 2 1/2, actually just under 2 3/4, and cutting edge is 2 1/2. Very much UK legal, and being a slip joint, there's no lock. Also fairly good bit of snap here. It doesn't take too much to disengage the blade, but I'd say the snap open would be about, probably about a 5 on opening the main blade. I should also specify this is very sharp. Second blade, which is a sheep foot. Oop. Actually, I'll close it before opening it. Again, listen. No scraping at all. Again, there's oil on this blade. No markings. Oh, pardon me. There is a marking. XT80 steel, which is basically a fancy way of saying AUS 8, as this is a mid-range knife. The steel is fair. Again, it's no M390. but for a traditional knife, this is certainly valid. XT80 steel, made in Japan. I'd estimate about a 4 on this blade. I really like the profile of it with the swedge. And finally, at about a 3 on the pull, oh, I should do the sound test again. At about a 3 on opening, you have the Spay blade. Again, weird blade shape, very short. The secondary blades are not even 2 inches, I believe. Yeah. So again, no blade play. Fairly weak spring on this one, as with the sheepfoot, but still strong enough that you don't have to worry about them closing on you constantly. There is also a swedge on the primary drop point, which I nearly forgot to mention. This did come practically shaving sharp. Scratch that. Definitely shaving sharp. All 3 blades are already primed and ready to use. You don't need to put an extra strop on these. They're already good to go, if you will. Just open up all the blades here. And again, no blade play on any of these. No blade wrap on any of these, as the tangs are fairly long and will hit the inside of the spring before the blade does. So no blade wrap, no blade rub, and no blade play. As I already said, no gaps. Everything's sanded very well. The bolsters look nice, the polish is on point, and they come extremely sharp. So really the only issue I can find with this is the ever so slightly raised pins. Blade straightness is a little bit off, but you're going to have slightly off blades when dealing with Stockmans, as they are often bent so that they will all fit inside the handle. That one's actually close to perfect. And again, that one's off a little because if it went straight down, it would hit this blade. So, yeah, they unfortunately with Stockmans, the blades aren't always going to be straight, and the centering is, well, there is no true perfect centering on a Stockman because the way that they're aligned, they're always going to be bent to all fit within the frame. As you can see on a single blade model, though, you can absolutely have that because there's no need for the blade to be bent. So all in all, as for the blade straightness, that's part of the Stockman as a design. But really, the only flaw that I can still find is the slightly raised pins. Gapping, non-existent. Transitions, otherwise, are perfect. Blades are as straight as they can be on a knife such as this. Grinds are really well done. Sharp, extremely sharp, right out of the box. And it just has an immense level of class, despite being what was originally just a farmer's knife. So I think calling it the Stockman Executive is very fair, as this has definitely been elevated from just a mere tool to a little bit of, well, a cutlery piece of art. I absolutely love this knife, and this video went longer than I hoped to, but yeah, XT80 steel, Oz 8 steel, made in Japan, practically perfect, definitely within the realm of GEC. And as much as I don't want to say this, and this will probably upset quite a few people, GEC isn't always perfect. I have 2 GEC knives, one has blade wrap and the other one has a bit of blade play. So they certainly are not perfect. They're very good, and they almost always are 99% perfect, but they always have that little thing that makes them, well, they're still handmade. They still have little flaws, as almost any knife will. Unless, of course, you're paying hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for a precision factory-made knife with absolute perfection and nothing else. But this knife is handmade, and it says it. So, I still think for being a handmade piece, it is brilliant, and I really enjoy it. So thank you very much for watching. This has been the Katz Executive Stockman, and this is the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.